For most homeowners, having a lush, green lawn is a sign of good maintenance, something that makes the neighborhood look nice and welcoming. But in my case, it became a crime. It all started when I received a fine notice in the mail from my HOA, citing me for excessive lawn watering during drought conditions. I thought it had to be a mistake. My lawn was green, sure, but I hadn't violated any watering restrictions. The city had clear rules. Lawn watering was allowed twice a week, during designated hours. Residents were encouraged to use drought-resistant landscaping. Fines would only apply to those caught exceeding their allocated water use. And I had followed every single rule to the letter. So why was I being fined? I called the HOA office and asked for clarification. And that's when I met Karen. Karen, the self-appointed lawn enforcer. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics. A woman who policed lawns like they were her personal kingdom. "We've received complaints," she told me over the phone, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your lawn is excessively green, which suggests water misuse. We have to be responsible during drought conditions." I frowned. "But I'm following the city's watering schedule. I'm not overwatering." "The color of your lawn says otherwise," Karen snapped. "It's unfair to your neighbors who are conserving water and suffering through brown patches." I was speechless. Since when was having a healthy lawn a violation? I tried to argue, explaining that I had used drought-resistant grass, proper soil treatments, and efficient irrigation. But Karen didn't care. "It doesn't matter how you're keeping it green," she said. "If it looks overwatered, you're in violation." And just like that, the first fine stood. The HOA's unfair targeting. I'm not the only one. At first, I thought this was just a misunderstanding. But then I started talking to my neighbors, and I realized something disturbing. I wasn't the only one getting fined for excessive greenness. The Johnsons, a retired couple, were hit with a $200 fine for their backyard lawn, even though their front yard was dry and yellowing. A new family down the street, who had just moved in, got a warning letter before they even had a chance to set up their sprinkler system. Several other homeowners received violations for simply having a better lawn than their neighbors. It was clear. The HOA wasn't enforcing actual water restrictions. They were punishing anyone who made their lawn look too nice. And the person leading this crusade? Karen. The real hypocrisy, Karen's lawn is suspiciously perfect. If Karen was so passionate about drought restrictions, you think she'd be leading by example, right? Wrong. One day, after receiving my second fine, I decided to take a closer look at Karen's property. And what I saw was infuriating. Her lawn was perfect. Deep, lush green. No brown spots. No dry patches. Even greener than mine. I stood there, staring at her yard, my blood boiling. How is it that I was being fined for having a nice lawn, but Karen's was in pristine condition? The hypocrisy was unreal. So I started watching. And that's when I caught her. The midnight watering scheme, Karen exposed. One night, around midnight, I was taking out the trash when I noticed something strange. A soft mist drifting across Karen's front yard. I squinted through the darkness and realized Karen was running her sprinklers in the middle of the night, when no one would see. I pulled out my phone and started recording. And over the next few nights, I caught her doing it again and again. She had set up an automatic watering system to run outside of HOA-monitored hours. That's why her lawn never dried out like everyone else's. She wasn't following the drought restrictions. She was cheating the system. And she had the audacity to fine others while breaking the very rules she enforced. That's when I knew. I wasn't just going to fight my fines. I was going to expose Karen. Karen thought she was untouchable. For weeks, she had patrolled the neighborhood, issuing fines left and right to anyone whose lawn didn't meet her personal drought standards. She had turned the HOA into her own dictatorship, deciding who was and wasn't allowed to have a green lawn. But once I caught her cheating the system, I knew. It was time to fight back. And I wasn't going to do it alone. Step 1. Gathering the evidence. The first thing I needed was proof. I already had multiple videos of Karen watering her lawn at night, but I needed more. So I started talking to other homeowners, especially the ones who had also been fined. And what I learned was worse than I thought. Karen had been targeting specific people, especially homeowners who had spoken out against her in the past. The Johnsons, the retired couple, told me that they had received 3 fines in 1 month, even though they barely watered their lawn. A single mom down the street had been fined twice for excessive greenness, but when she asked for proof, the HOA refused to provide any. One homeowner had installed artificial turf to comply with the drought rules and still got fined because Karen claimed it was too realistic. The pattern was clear. Karen wasn't enforcing drought restrictions. She was punishing people she didn't like. And while everyone else was suffering under her ridiculous rules, she was secretly watering her own lawn to make sure hers looked the best. Once I had enough people on my side, we moved to the next step. Step 2. Calling out the HOA's corruption. We knew that if we wanted change, we couldn't just complain behind closed doors. We had to make it public. So we decided to confront the HOA directly. We organized a neighborhood meeting, one that Karen and the HOA board couldn't ignore. I sent out emails, flyers, and group messages telling homeowners to bring any fines they had received and any photos or proof they had. And when the day of the meeting came, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. The HOA meeting, Karen's worst nightmare. Karen walked into the meeting with her usual smug expression, clipboard in hand. She wasn't expecting a packed room full of angry residents. She definitely wasn't expecting me to walk to the front of the room, pull out my phone, and start playing the videos I had recorded of her. The footage of her sprinklers running at midnight. The evidence that she had been secretly watering her lawn while fining the rest of us. The moment the videos started playing, the room fell silent. And then, the crowd erupted. "Are you serious?" Someone shouted. "You fined me $300 while you were out here watering at night? She's a hypocrite," another voice yelled. "We should be fining her." Karen's face turned bright red. She tried to defend herself. "This is taken out of context," she stammered. "I have special circumstances." "Like what?" I demanded. "What makes you so special that you get to break the rules while the rest of us suffer?" Karen's lip curled. And that's when she said the dumbest thing possible. Karen's excuse, the so-called medical exemption. "I have a medical exemption." Karen suddenly blurted out. The room fell silent again. People stared at her like she had completely lost her mind. "Medical exemption," someone repeated. "For what?" Karen crossed her arms, refusing to look anyone in the eye. "I have a condition that requires me to have a stress-free environment," she muttered. "My doctor said that looking at green grass helps reduce my anxiety." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman, who had been torturing the neighborhood for months, issuing hundreds of dollars in fines and ruining people's properties, was now claiming that she was the real victim? The room erupted again. People were furious. "So you get special treatment, but the rest of us have to suffer. You're telling me I got fined $400 because you wanted to feel relaxed? If your anxiety is so bad, why did you join the HOA in the first place?" Karen's excuses weren't working. She was losing control of the room. And when Greg, the HOA president, finally stepped forward, he looked just as annoyed as the rest of us. The HOA tries to cover for Karen, but fails miserably. Greg cleared his throat. "Let's all calm down," he said, trying to regain control. "I understand that people are upset." "We don't want apologies," I interrupted. "We want action. We want these fines revoked. And we want Karen removed from the HOA board." The room cheered in agreement. Greg looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He turned to Karen, his eyes narrowing. "Karen," he said slowly, "is there any truth to these accusations?" Karen stiffened. She knew she was trapped. She tried to defend herself one last time. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood," she whined. "I didn't mean to." But Greg cut her off. "Did you or did you not water your lawn at night?" Karen hesitated. And that was enough. Greg sighed and turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, Karen is suspended from the HOA board. The room erupted into applause. But we weren't done yet. Because now that Karen was exposed, it was time to bring down the entire system that let her get away with it. Karen's removal from the HOA board should have been the end of it. But instead of admitting their mistakes, the remaining board members tried to sweep everything under the rug. They wanted to move on quietly, to act like Karen was the only problem and that they had no part in the corruption. But the residents, we weren't letting that happen. Because Karen wasn't acting alone. The HOA had let her run wild for months, and now they were just as guilty. So while they tried to cover their tracks, we decided to push back even harder. The HOA's damage control, the pathetic apology letter. A few days after the explosive HOA meeting, residents received an email from the board. The subject? Addressing community concern. The message? Dear homeowners, we acknowledge the recent concerns raised by the community regarding lawn maintenance policies. While we strive to uphold fair and reasonable standards, we recognize that some past decisions may have caused frustration. Moving forward, we will be reviewing our policies to ensure that all homeowners feel heard and respected. We appreciate your understanding as we work together for a better community. That was it. No mention of Karen. No acknowledgement of the unfair fines. No offer to refund the money they had stolen from us. Just a generic, empty statement designed to shut us up. And it backfired spectacularly. The neighborhood erupts, the petition for justice. The moment the email went out, the community group chat exploded. They think this is enough? Where's our refund? We should sue them. They're just trying to dodge responsibility. People were furious. And that's when we decided we weren't stopping at Karen. We were going after the entire HOA board. So we started a petition demanding the following. The HOA must refund all unfair fines related to the 2 Green Lawn policy. A full investigation into HOA board spending must be conducted. The board members who allowed Karen's behavior must resign immediately. The petition spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had over 100 signatures. By the end of the second day, it had over 250. By the end of the week, almost every homeowner had signed it. The message was clear. We weren't just going to sit back and forget. We wanted justice. And the HOA? They were running out of excuses. Though a desperate attempt to keep control. Realizing that the petition was gaining momentum, the HOA tried one last desperate move. They scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss the issue, without inviting the homeowners. Their plan? To quietly shut down the petition and stop the growing rebellion. But they didn't count on us showing up anyway. The uninvited guests crashing the HOA's secret meeting. On the night of the secret HOA meeting, several of us decided to crash it. We knew where they were holding it, at the HOA office in the clubhouse. So we showed up. About 20 residents walked in, unannounced. Greg, the HOA president, nearly jumped out of his seat. "This is a private board meeting," he sputtered. "Then why are you discussing issues that affect all of us?" I shot back. The other homeowners started shouting. "You don't get to make decisions behind closed doors anymore. We're not going anywhere until you answer for what you've done. Where's our refund, Greg?" Greg looked trapped. The rest of the HOA board members shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this. And now, they had nowhere to run. The residents take over, the HOA's lies unravel. Realizing that they couldn't shut us out, Greg tried to take control of the room. "Look," he said, "we understand you're upset, but HOA policies are legally binding. Refunds aren't possible." That's when Mr. Harris, the retired veteran, stood up. He pulled out a folder full of printed documents and laid them on the table. "That's a lie," he said, "because we did our research." Greg paled. What are these?" "These are HOA bylaws," Mr. Harris said. "We found a clause that states the HOA board has full authority to void fines if they were issued improperly." "So, Greg, why are you lying to us?" Silence. Then, yes. Homeowners started shouting. "You knew these fines were wrong, and you still took our money? We want our refunds. You let Karen run this HOA like a dictatorship, and now you're trying to protect yourself?" Greg tried to regain control, but it was too late. The HOA's lies had been exposed, and now they were cornered. The HOA board collapses. One by one, they resign. At that moment, Greg realized he had lost. There was no defending this. The crowd was relentless, demanding answers, demanding justice. And so, one by one, the HOA board members began resigning. First, Greg, then the treasurer, then the secretary. By the end of the meeting, half the board had stepped down. The HOA was falling apart. And with no leadership left, the remaining board members had no choice but to give in. The fines were voided. Refunds were issued to every homeowner, and new elections were scheduled to replace the corrupt leadership. We had won, but we weren't done yet, because now we were going after Karen's final act of hypocrisy. Karen had been exposed, humiliated, and removed from the HOA board. Her hypocrisy was out in the open. The HOA board had collapsed, and homeowners were getting their refunds. By all accounts, her reign of terror should have been over. But Karen, she wasn't going down without a fight. She had spent too many years controlling the neighborhood, too much time enforcing ridiculous rules, too much energy building herself up as the ultimate authority. And now that she was powerless, she was desperate to get it back. So while the HOA was falling apart, Karen was plotting her comeback. And what she tried next was more insane than anything she had done before. Karen's plan: running for HOA president. The first sign that Karen wasn't done came in the form of a flyer taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. In bold letters, it read, "Vote for Karen, restore order to our community." Below that, in fine print, was Karen's list of promises. "I will bring back strong leadership and accountability. I will ensure that community standards are enforced fairly. I will protect property values and stop reckless rule breaking." I nearly laughed out loud. Karen, the same woman who had been caught breaking her own rules, was now claiming to be the only one who could restore order. The same woman who had fined people for having green grass was now pretending to care about fairness. It was beyond delusional. And worse, she was actually trying to win. Karen's smear campaign, trying to rewrite history. Karen knew that most of the neighborhood hated her. So instead of admitting her mistakes, she tried to rewrite history. She started spreading rumors that she had been forced out unfairly by a mob of disruptive homeowners. She told people that the videos of her watering her lawn were fake, or that they had been taken out of context. She claimed that without her leadership, the neighborhood was in chaos. She even went so far as to accuse the new HOA board members of corruption. "They just want to run things their way," she told people. "They're no better than the old board." Karen was playing the victim. She wanted people to believe that she was the only one who could fix things. And the scariest part, some people actually believed her. Karen's loyalists, the people who wanted her back. Even though most of the neighborhood hated Karen, there were still a handful of people who supported her. A small group of older residents, the same people who had benefited from Karen's unfair rules, started pushing for her return. They went door to door telling people Karen was the only one who kept the HOA strong. Things were better when Karen was in charge. The new HOA board is too weak to enforce the rules properly. It was insane. The same people who had been perfectly fine with Karen's abuse, because they were never on the receiving end, now wanted her back in power. And suddenly, the HOA election was becoming an actual fight. Because if Karen somehow won, everything we had fought for would be wiped away. The residents fight back, exposing Karen again. We knew we couldn't let Karen win. So we fought back. We started our own counter-campaign, a neighborhood-wide effort to remind people exactly who Karen was. We reshared the videos of her breaking the drought rules. We reminded people of the fines she had issued, the hypocrisy, the unfair targeting. We printed flyers with a simple message: "Don't forget what Karen did." And the biggest move? We hosted a community Q&A event, a night where homeowners could ask the new HOA board members anything. Karen was invited too. And she actually showed up. She thought she could win people over. But the moment she stepped in front of the crowd, the questions started coming. "Karen, do you admit that you broke the water restrictions? Why did you fine people unfairly? If you really cared about fairness, why didn't you resign when you were caught?" Karen couldn't answer. She tried to dodge the questions, tried to spin her lies. But people weren't buying it anymore. Her campaign fell apart in real time. Election day, the final blow to Karen's ego. When the HOA election results came in, it was a landslide. Karen got only a handful of votes. The new HOA board, they won by a massive majority. Karen had failed. She wasn't just out of power. She was completely irrelevant. And the final blow. The HOA passed a new bylaw, one that permanently banned Karen from ever holding a leadership position again. She wasn't just defeated. She was erased. And just like that, Karen's time as the neighborhood dictator was officially over. Karen had lost everything. She had been removed from the HOA board. Her power trip had crumbled. Her attempt to take back control had failed miserably. And for most people, that would have been the end. But Karen, she wasn't the type to go down quietly. If she couldn't rule the neighborhood, she was going to make sure the neighborhood suffered without her. And what she did next was pure insanity. Karen's descent into madness, the warning signs. At first, Karen seemed to disappear. She stopped patrolling the streets. She stopped sending out emails. She even stopped attending HOA meetings. People assumed she had finally accepted defeat. But those of us who knew Karen, we knew better. And then strange things started happening. The HOA office's mailbox was vandalized. Anonymous complaints flooded City Hall, accusing homeowners of fake violations. Some residents received mysterious letters threatening legal action over unauthorized property modifications. Nobody knew who was behind it, but we all had a pretty good guess. Karen might have lost her official title, but she was still trying to make everyone's lives miserable. And then she took it one step further. The midnight sabotage, Karen caught in the act. One night, around 2 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of a car door slamming. At first, I ignored it, but then I noticed something strange. A shadowy figure was moving between houses, stopping at people's front yards. I squinted through the darkness, and my jaw dropped. It was Karen, and she was pouring something on people's lawns. I grabbed my phone and started recording. Then I stepped outside and shouted, "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" She froze. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then she dropped the container she was holding and sprinted back to her car. I ran toward my lawn and immediately smelled it. Bleach. Karen had been pouring bleach on people's grass. She was so bitter about losing that she was trying to destroy everyone else's lawns. She wasn't just petty. She was unhinged, calling the cops Karen's arrest. I didn't waste any time. I called 911 and reported vandalism in progress. Within minutes, police arrived. They pulled Karen over at the end of the street before she could escape. And when they checked her car, they found 3 more bottles of bleach, a list of addresses, a clipboard with notes about who deserved it. It wasn't random. Karen had planned this. She had been watching, waiting, and keeping track of the people who had spoken out against her. And she had tried to destroy their lawns in revenge. The cops didn't take it lightly. Vandalizing people's property? That's a crime. And the fact that she had been caught in the act, with evidence, she was screwed. Karen was arrested on the spot. The entire neighborhood watched as she was taken away in handcuffs. For someone who had spent years calling the cops on people for nonsense, it was poetic justice. Karen's charges, the legal consequences. Karen was charged with multiple counts of vandalism and property damage. Some homeowners pressed charges directly, demanding financial compensation. And since the police had actual footage of her committing the crime, she had no defense. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was having a mental health crisis, that she had snapped under stress. But the judge didn't buy it. Karen was ordered to pay thousands of dollars in damages to the homeowners she had targeted, serve community service hours to give back to the neighborhood she had terrorized, attend mandatory counseling for anger management and conflict resolution. And the best part, she was given a restraining order, banning her from interfering with HOA affairs ever again. Karen had spent years controlling the neighborhood. Now, she couldn't even set foot in an HOA meeting. She had lost everything, and she had no one to blame but herself. Karen's reputation is ruined. She becomes the neighborhood outcast. After the trial, Karen's reputation was beyond repair. She tried to act like the victim, claiming that she had been bullied out of her role. She even tried to move past it, pretending nothing had happened. But the neighborhood didn't forget. People avoided her. Neighbors refused to acknowledge her. Her once pristine lawn, it became overgrown and neglected, a perfect metaphor for how much her life had fallen apart. Eventually, Karen put her house up for sale. She couldn't stand living in a place where no one respected her anymore. And when she finally left for good, The entire neighborhood celebrated. She had spent years ruining people's lives. Now, she was the one forced to run away. The neighborhood without Karen, finally free. With Karen gone, life in the neighborhood completely changed. No more ridiculous fines. No more petty HOA power plays. No more fear of getting targeted for nonsense rules. People relaxed. The new HOA leadership focused on real improvements, not just harassing homeowners. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a real community again. We had fought back. We had won. And the best part, we made sure that no Karen would ever take over again. Karen was gone. Her reign of terror was officially over. The neighborhood had survived her HOA dictatorship, her ridiculous fines, her desperate power grabs, and even her final act of vandalism. But we weren't just going to move on like nothing happened. We had learned a valuable lesson, one that we would never forget. So power attracts the worst kind of people. And if we didn't take action, another Karen could rise up again. So as we finally breathed a sigh of relief, we decided we weren't just getting rid of Karen. We were HOA-proofing our neighborhood forever. The neighborhood unites, fixing what Karen broke. The first step was undoing the damage that Karen and the corrupt HOA had caused, and that meant rewriting the rulebook. We held a series of community meetings where homeowners could voice their frustrations and propose real changes. Some of the first things we did: abolished the ridiculous fines for lawn color, trash placement, and other petty infractions. Implemented a fair warning system instead of immediate penalties. Rewrote the HOA bylaws to prevent power-hungry board members from acting without oversight. Made financial records public to stop future corruption before it could start. We weren't just patching up the damage. We were making sure another Karen could never take over. And when it came time to elect a new HOA board, we chose people we actually trusted. No more self-important tyrants. No more power-hungry rule enforcers. Just regular homeowners who wanted to make the community better, not worse. And the difference was immediate. The HOA is rebuilt, the Karen-free era begins. With new leadership in place, things finally started to feel normal again. The HOA now focused on real issues, like improving common areas, organizing community events, and actually listening to homeowners. Instead of harassing people over their lawns, they started funding improvements for public spaces. Instead of issuing fines, they started offering support for elderly homeowners who needed help maintaining their yards. Instead of being a weapon for power-hungry board members, the HOA finally became what it was supposed to be, an actual community resource. And the best part? People were no longer afraid of opening their mailboxes. For the first time in years, we weren't living under a dictatorship. We were just neighbors. And that felt incredible. The anti-Karen policies, how we HOA-proofed ourselves. Even though Karen was gone, we knew that someone like her could show up again. So we made sure to put permanent safeguards in place to prevent history from repeating itself. Some of the rules we implemented. No single board member could enforce rules alone. Any violation had to be reviewed and approved by a majority of board members. HOA board members were subject to term limits. No one could sit on the board for more than 3 years. All HOA decisions had to be transparent. Meetings were now recorded and made available for the entire neighborhood to watch. Homeowners could challenge fines publicly. If someone felt they were being unfairly targeted, they could appeal in front of the entire HOA. The HOA couldn't create new rules without a community vote. No more power-hungry dictators making up their own laws. And finally, we banned Karen from ever serving on the HOA again. We actually put it in writing. The bylaws were officially updated to block her from running for any position of power. And even though she had moved away, we all agreed, if she ever tried to come back, we'd be ready. Karen's legacy, the neighborhood's running joke. Even though Karen was long gone, her legacy lived on. Not as a respected former board member, but as a running joke. Every time someone suggested a ridiculous rule, someone would say, "Sounds like something Karen would do." Whenever a new neighbor asked about past HOA issues, we'd say, "Let me tell you about the time our HOA president got arrested." Karen had spent years thinking she was the most powerful person in the neighborhood. No, she was just a cautionary tale. And that was the best kind of karma. Life after Karen, a happy ending at last. With the HOA finally fixed and Karen out of the picture, the neighborhood was better than ever. People actually enjoyed their homes again. No one had to stress about ridiculous fines. Neighbors started getting along instead of living in fear. The lawns. Some people let them go brown. Some people kept them green. And you know what? No one cared anymore. Because we had finally realized something important. A neighborhood isn't about how perfect the grass looks. It's about the people who live there. And now that Karen was gone, we finally felt like a real community again. Final reflection, the lesson learned. The Great Karen HOA crisis had been one of the worst experiences of our lives. But in the end, we had come out stronger. We had fought back. We had won. And most importantly, we had taken control of our own neighborhood. No HOA should ever have absolute power. No homeowner should ever feel trapped in their own house. And no one should ever let a Karen run the show. Because if there's one thing we learned, it's that the only way to stop a bad HOA is to take it down yourself. And that's exactly what we did.